Let's talk a little bit about the report and the preparation. Is it that, how often is a report prepared?
A report is prepared depending on how often a remit is received, and that can be very ad hoc. In the case of the 120th report, it is really a job evaluation exercise. And of course, this has taken a lot of time. So it is important for me to provide some context.
Of course.
And perhaps even some history about job evaluation exercises in Trinidad and Tobago specific to the public service. So I'll go back in time. So the compensation and classification plan for the civil service is an old plan. It was developed in 1966. And at one point in time, Alan, all of the services, the teaching service, the police service, the fire service, all of those positions were in that singular plan. Over time, those services came out and had their own legislative statutory authorities, but more so their own compensation plans. And there's a point in time in our history that is very critical to the discussions that is happening now. And this point in time is around 2002, where the state would have completed job evaluation exercises for the prison service, for the teaching service, for the fire service, and for the police service, those 4 services. And on average, for the protective services, they would have received about a 27% increase on average. For the teaching service, as much as 25%. And in that period, the state also completed a job evaluation exercise for the judicial and legal service. They would have received an average of 40%. The current evaluation exercise of the SRC was really an outcome of a decision made by the cabinet in 2009. That's 15 years ago. And of course, again, some context to share. In the period leading up to that cabinet decision, one may recall that we were treating with the global economic crisis, global recession. So at that point in time, the SRC had in fact frozen the salaries of the holders under the SRC for the period 2008 to 2010. And in that report, it was recommended a job evaluation exercise be undertaken. The cabinet agreed to that recommendation, but it took 6 years, Marlon, before we could get a consultant on board.
Yes.
And the reason for that is because a feasibility study had to be undertaken. We didn't have the experience or the expertise to treat with an evaluation exercise of this nature. Why? Because it is the first time in our history that office holders under the purview of the SRC was subject to a job evaluation exercise. And I will signal in advance that I will speak about what is a job evaluation exercise later on. So this exercise, the genesis began in 2009. A consultant came on board in 2015, and let me speak a bit about that consultant. This consultant is Korn Ferry, formerly the Hague Group. The Hague Group is the leading job evaluation organization in the globe. They have done job evaluation exercises for over 12,000 entities, government sector, private sector, NGOs, and so on, in over 70 countries. And the selection of that consultant was done through open tender with the CTB at the time, and that consultant came on board. So this exercise, the start of it in terms of the work of the consultant really began sometime in 2015, 2016. We are in 2024. The exercise has taken in excess of 15 years to be completed. That is something that the public must be aware of. They also must be aware that there were other job evaluation exercises that were completed, and this is the first time this group was subject to such an evaluation exercise. The other thing I would add, Marlon, in so far as the exercise comprised of different processes. It includes something called job evaluation that has processes. So to determine how you analyze jobs, I will use an analogy. In this newsroom, you have an editor, you have a cameraman, you have a photographer. In that grouping of jobs, it is likely the editor, who's the top individual with the most decision making, will be the top position. It is no different than the evaluation processes we went through. So the consultant, Korn Ferry, would have evaluated and had the responsibility for evaluating every single job under the purview of the SRC. More importantly, there was always an argument that a foreign consultant does not understand our local context.
The environment.
They will miss it. They will miss it. It's natural that they will miss certain cues. They don't have the lived positionality as somebody living in our environment, understanding our circumstances to advise on what jobs really do. So what we did, we also had a job evaluation committee which encompass individuals in positions like permanent secretary, assistant solicitor general, an elected official, in the case of a mayor at that time, a chairman of a commission, persons from the legal fraternity, staff and experienced professionals in the CPO's office. And that job evaluation committee, Marlon, was subject to rigorous training from the consultant. They had to understand the methodology that the consultant was going to be using.
Yeah.
But before the process of job evaluation commenced, there's a process. How do we know that the job, let's say for example, of the CPO is what it should be? And in that process, for all of the jobs under review, job descriptions had to be developed. So you had to analyze the job, see what is happening at that point in time, determine what are the appropriate standards, and develop a job description that is signed off by those incumbents. That is the basis for the evaluation. So the evaluation doesn't happen in absence of that. That is the guiding document that they will use to evaluate the worth of the job across a spectrum of criteria. So that occurred. Now, when that occurred, there's another aspect of the exercise, which is the compensation side of it. The aspect of the job evaluation deals with relativity. So the CPO sits here, the Commissioner of Police sits there, as the case may be, in relative to each other. The compensation survey, I'm pleased to advise and inform the public, was information provided by one of the leading consulting firms in the region with over 40 years' experience dealing with compensation surveys. And they provided data about what are the appropriate compensation levels to consider. I want to go back and say something as well. You don't go and get compensation data points for every position in the SRC. They are anchor points. So you select certain positions that you want to find a comparator to in the market. For this exercise, it was the permanent secretary that was the anchor. There was the puisne judge was an anchor, and members of parliament. Those were the three anchors. And so once the consultant was able to provide the information for the compensation, and we already completed the job evaluation scoring in terms of relativity, the process was completed in terms of what the recommendations were. So in summary, that is what occurred. It's a very robust process. Office holders under the purview of the SRC, Marlon, I have to also include this, would have benefited on an increase in salary on the last occasion, that being 2011. So for the last 13 years, no position under the purview of the SRC had an adjustment in salary. And interestingly, even in preparation for having our discussion this morning, I had to look at some technical data just to kind of validate what I had known. When one goes back to 2008, so 2008 to 2024, and going into 2025, in 2008, SRC holders, office holders, would have been frozen. In 2011 to 2013, the 98 report under the former administration saw an adjustment. Interestingly, no one is commenting on the government's acceptance of another report called the 113th report. The 113th report was laid at the same time as the 120th report. And the 113th report, Marlon, froze SRC holders' compensation for the years 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. So in essence, SRC holders' compensation would have been frozen for 9 out of the last 12 years. More so, if a decision was made not to accept the recommendations of the 120th report, it would have meant that SRC holders, and to use a term that the Prime Minister used when he briefed the nation recently, the management structure of Trinidad and Tobago would have been frozen for 15 years out of the last 18. And there are implications for that, and I'll just explain what some of those implications are. The implications for that simply means the public service, because you have a management structure, and that profound explanation or description of what it is, SRC holders, below that management structure are services. And those services have other positions that the CPO, as employer, would negotiate for. So, for example, in the case of the police service, the highest level position in the police service that the CPO will negotiate with the Police Association for is a position called Assistant Commissioner of Police. Bearing in mind that the government has also extended an offer through the CPO of an additional 5% for the period 2020 to 2022. It would mean, Marlon, from 2008 up to 2022, if this 128th report was not accepted, office holders where the CPO would negotiate for would have received approximately 38 to 40% salary increases, whereas SRC holders would have only received a 24 adjustment. What it means is that the differential at the top has closed. The implications for that, if this report was not accepted, and I've already signaled and advised the Honorable Minister of Finance, that would immediate effect, if such a decision was made, which is always the prerogative of the executive not to accept the recommendations, immediately we ought to be halting every single job evaluation exercise that the state committed on the last round of negotiations with the CPO to conduct. So the police service evaluation, the teaching service job evaluation, the prison service job evaluation, the fire service job evaluation that we are about to start in the next year or two, all of them will be halted because the compression will be too tight. So at this point in time, if I even look at the data, the ACP that I have responsibility for to negotiate with the police is only 13% lower than the Deputy Commissioner of Police, to give an example. So there are implications for the wider public service if the 120th report was not accepted. And I have also advised the Honourable Minister of Finance that perhaps we need to also consider halting any job evaluation exercise in the wider state sector, simply because, Marlon, the wider state sector, there's a growing wage disparity between the public service and the wider state sector. So those are some of the implications. There's another implication that I want to share. It's a significant one.
Yeah. But, you know, Dr. Dindial, I want to quote you, because I think that, and really, I think that you have given an explanation as to how these proposals were reached, these recommendations in this SRC report. However, I want to quote someone that you know very well. That person's name is Dr. Daryl Dindial. Yeah? And what you would have said some time ago is that at that time you wanted to meet with 11 trade unions because, according to you, you wanted to emphasize the importance of the meeting, highlighting that, that there's a thorough grasp of the economic context that is critical for the associations and the unions and the government in approaching negotiations with clarity and mutual understanding, right? And that you wanted to give a context on the state of the economy. And I think by these, and I base it on what trade unions have been saying, other organizations have been saying, I think based on what prevails in the economy right now, these proposals were seen as unnecessary at this time. Some of these increases that we have seen, I think that people, some sectors may see it as over the top for some office holders. And I put it back in the context as to what prevails in society at this time, the economic environment. So how do you defend these increases with such an argument?